Welcome to the Sage Family Podcast, where we explore natural homeschooling, gentle parenting, simple living, and family adventure.
I'm Rachel Rainbolt, the Sage Family Mentor, coming to you from an island in the Pacific Northwest, where I live wild and free in connection with my hilarious husband and 3 growing sailors in our fixer-upper on the beach. So join us around the campfire and let's get living the family life. This is episode 86, and today I'm here with Alexandra Pope and Sjanie Hugo Wurlitzer talking about menstruality. Alexandra and Sjanie are the co-founders of Red School and co-authors of the iconic and hugely celebrated book Wild Power, Discover the Magic of the Menstrual Cycle and Awaken the Feminine Path to Power, and their latest book, Wise Power, Discover the Liberating Power of Menopause to Awaken Authority, Purpose, and Belonging. They are pioneering the new emerging field of menstruality, creating a new lexicon and approach to women's health and well-being, creativity and leadership, and spiritual life based on the power of menstruality consciousness. Recording this episode today, I am on day 7 of my cycle, emerging slowly out of my inner winter for my dawning spring. As you listen to this episode and learn more about the inner seasons, see if you can tell in my quieter energy and my deeply reflective tone. In some podcast episodes, I experience myself more like a bird, excitedly flitting around in the sky with a friend, and other times more like a mother bear on her sojourn into or out of the mountain. No particular season produces a better or worse podcast episode, in my opinion. I just notice the difference. I honor it and believe in the value of all of it. Alexandra and Sjanie are so physically present and grounded in their bodies as they communicate a lot of emotion visually in a way that is a real value add to the experience of the conversation. So I want to remind you that the video versions of the podcast episodes are available inside the Sage Family Village, where we also support each other in the ongoing work of acknowledging and honoring our true needs, 1% shifts at a time. So many sisters in the Sage Family Village live in alignment with their cycles and enthusiastically recommend menstrual cycle awareness and your book, Wild Power. I'll be honest that when I first picked it up, I experienced some grief for the 25 years of menstruating without this awareness, and a little resistance from the scientist who lives in my brain on a diet of evidence-based analysis. But I gave myself a minute and came back to it and let it do its work on me. And I am so glad that I did. I feel like you have so lovingly and generously restored a maternal inheritance, like a birthright that patriarchy stole. So thank you for that sincerely. And welcome to the show, Sjanie and Alexandra.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I love that line, restored a maternal inheritance. I've never heard it framed like that. And spot on. Really beautifully said. Yes.
Yeah, and I also just love your little personal sort of hiccup along the way. Yes. Yes. How great.
I really did. I picked up the book and I started trying to read it. And then so much grief came up for me. Like initially, I set it down and had to walk away for a few months and really process that. Wow, how different the journey would have been had I had this knowledge, this knowing, this sense way back 25 years ago, and had to, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is today. So then I was able to kind of, come back to the work. So sincerely, thank you. Will you guys introduce yourselves and share a bit about who you are and what you're passionate for all of the people listening who are not yet huge fans like I am, but they will be soon?
Right. So I'm Alexandra Pope, and I'm co-director of Red School. And at Red School, we teach on the psychological and the spiritual power of the menstrual cycle and the journey from menarche to menopause and beyond. And this work has been with me for over 40 years, or close on, or just over 40 years now, of growing. It's been a huge emergent process. And at the back of it is an utter commitment to stay true to my menstrual cycle, to the basic organic impulse of my menstrual cycle. And in doing that, what it opened up or revealed, Rachel. And that decision to step onto the path of this work was prompted by outrageous menstrual pain. And at 31, I had been doing fertility awareness all through my 20s. I had an intrinsic kind of knowing of something. But at 31, I kicked into another very profound gear with insane menstrual pain that could last for 3-4 days, which I'd never ever had before. And I made the radical decision at that point to believe in my body and follow it, that it was talking to me, and I would believe in it and I would follow it. And I gave space to menstruation, and the rest is history. Yeah. Oh, and I'm postmenopause now. So I've got the kind of whole thing. I'm pretty grounded in something now.
You're on the other end of that journey for us.
Yeah. I can report now on, the great spiritual undertaking that is the menstrual cycle, and that is menopause. Yes.
Yeah, and so I am the other half of Red School, Alexandra's co-founder, along with Alexandra. And Sjanie is my name, Sjanie Hugo Wurlitzer. And just listening to you speak and what you said, actually, Rachel, I am deeply in love with and passionate about this knowing that lives in my body, that lives in my menstrual cycle, this intelligence that has tutored me now for many, many years when my cycles returned after having been on contraception, having had the contrast of no cycle because I was on contraception, and the lifelessness that I felt in my being, the loss of creativity and connection that I experienced during those years without a menstrual cycle, versus the reawakening of my whole being when my cycles returned, and how that plugged me into myself and my calling and really ignited my creative life. And I believe led me to Alexandra, who I met. We go way back. I met Alexandra, nearly 20 years ago now. And we've been working together for almost 15 years in this very deep creative partnership. The work that we teach can't be found anywhere, and it isn't scientifically evidence-based, as you so accurately noted. It is based in our own lived experience and the experience of thousands of people that we worked with. So it's really born out of women's bodies, women's experiences, and the intelligence that is speaking through us, through our menstrual cycle. And so that's been very exciting for us because it's evolving every day. And every day we're learning more and more layers of this work is being uncovered. And I myself I'm in my 40s, and I'm a mother of 2 daughters. And for me, the menstrual cycle is my number one parenting tool. I've learned a lot about parenting in my years of parenting, and there's so much I still don't know. But the thing that holds me through it all is menstrual cycle awareness as a kind of backbone practice and a way to really locate myself and hold rhythm in my family. So I'm excited to share some of that with you today.
What a partnership. I mean, what a gift to us, like this partnership is. So I'm so glad that you guys met all of those many years ago. And so funny how you're that evidence-based piece. It's like for those of us, especially I feel like the more formal education you have, the more it's like a middle-aged white man in a lab coat has to say it's real before we're allowed.
Real. Yeah. Yeah. Forget what you experience. Somebody else got to tell you it's true. Yeah. I know we all lean in that direction. It's such a reclamation to trust our own experience as valid. It's such a reclamation that, yeah,
absolutely. Okay. I love to start these conversations sort of from like the mainstream place that most of us come from. So why is like the mainstream experience of in relationship with menstruation misguided? Like, why is the way that most people have been doing it for a while and thinking about it, how is it not serving them?
We're essentially taught that it's kind of not relevant. I mean, that it's dispensable, that it's that
it's a pain in the ass, quite
it's
frankly.
A pain in the ass.
It's a hassle, a limitation.
I mean, and menstruation is always disrupt. I mean, menstruation does disrupt. It is messy. I mean, with or without suffering, it's never convenient when you menstruate, can we just say? And that's just the whole point of it. It's meant to, I always feel it's meant to interrupt. We're not meant to suffer at all, by the way. But yeah, it's disruptive. And in that sense, it's a good thing because it's disrupting this incredible trajectory that we live in our culture. We live in this linear culture where we imagine we can just do, keep going and consume and produce. And when you become aware of the menstrual cycle, when you really step on board with your menstrual cycle, you discover how unsustainable that way of being is. And the menstrual cycle, when you start practicing menstrual cycle awareness, it starts to restore you to a sane way of living, and a way of living that's sustainable. And also deeply healing. If you're suffering, you'll find your symptoms will change. But basically, we have been given the message that the menstrual cycle is, just an inconvenience that we have to put up with, if we want to have children. And if we don't have children, I mean, the message from some doctors is that you could actually just be on hormonal contraception all the time, or, even take your womb out. I mean, it's horrific to think that. Counter to that now, there is a very slow recognition happening within the sort of mainstream world that the menstrual cycle is the fifth vital sign. Bit like whatever the other signs are, like your blood pressure, your this, this thing, temperature, and so on. That actually they're recognizing now that the menstrual cycle really, how we are experiencing our menstrual cycle is giving clues to us about our overall health and well-being. That and by noticing what's happening in your menstrual cycle, you're getting insight into your health. So at that fundamental level, at that, within the medical world, there is a slow dawning recognition, only amongst one or two at the moment, but it is starting to happen. So that is the beginning of a shift. But yes, for centuries, the whole medical approach has been the norm is the male body and we're the aberration, and the menstrual cycle is a serious aberration.
Well said. Yeah, the message I always just sort of got was like, it's gross and uncomfortable and it's a weakness and it's your job to try to control and endure it. And there wasn't much of a narrative running counter to that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you guys are really offering this alternative perspective, understanding, relationship with our bodies around menstruation and menstruality. So can you sort of introduce us to that to what menstruality is and sort of how it works. And maybe, if we've been on this mainstream path and you're sort of inviting us onto this other path, like what is this other path? Introduce us to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the invitation we're extending is to very simply return our attention to our changing nature, to our changing mood, to the fact that we are not consistent, we're not the same all the time, and that we are profoundly cyclical. And we're inviting people into a place of knowing and trusting that as an incredible resource, a power, that the fact that we are changing day by day and throughout the menstrual month is in fact, let's just call it our superpower. And that you no longer have to fight against your rhythm, against your natural inclination. You no longer have to ignore your own needs and your own changing energy throughout the menstrual month. And instead, you can really trust it, honor it, allow yourself to go with this rhythm, to really lean into your cyclical nature, to the ebb and flow of your being, to the time of deep rest and the time of activity, to the time of kind of expansion and coming out and growing energy, to the kind of time of traveling back in and your energy shifting gear and you coming into a more quiet, restful place. That is a resource on all levels. So we teach about this practice called menstrual cycle awareness, which is the kind of specific steps that you need to answer this invitation and to really start to apply this in your life. And I'll just say briefly what that is, just to set a frame for our conversation, what menstrual cycle awareness is, because no doubt in this community and the people listening, there are many of you who have practiced fertility awareness because it's such a useful tool for conception, but also for contraception. So fertility awareness, for those of you who don't know, is about tracking the kind of biological and physical changes of the menstrual cycle and how throughout the menstrual month, there are ways that you can receive cues from your body about where you are in your menstrual cycle, which of the phases of the cycle you're in. And of course, there are 4 phases to the menstrual cycle, and each one is very unique. Just like in a season of the year, each of these phases has its very own characteristics and powers. Now, the practice of menstrual cycle awareness is in a way the next step from fertility awareness. So fertility awareness cues us into this body literacy layer of our experience. And then menstrual cycle awareness cues us into the emotional, energetic, and psychological layer of the cycle experience. So we're paying attention to what day of our cycle we're on, and we're noticing on each and every day what our mood is like, how we feel, how much energy we do or don't have, what we're most wanting or needing, maybe even what the state of our mind is like, what we feel like we're good at today and what we feel like we just can't manage today, what we're feeling, where we're feeling our strengths are in any given day, because they change through the cycle. So menstrual cycle awareness is that layer of our experience. And if we track that, ideally writing it down, we'll start to notice the pattern in our cycle experience. We'll begin to notice, in a way, the different faces of ourselves in each of these phases of the cycle, in each of these, what we call inner seasons of the cycle. And we start to see that there is a pattern to our behaviors, to the kinds of things that happen in our day at certain points in our cycle. There is absolutely a pattern. In fact, I like to say, when you practice menstrual cycle awareness, you suddenly realize that everything is cyclical. There are no things that just happen randomly. You realize there's a cyclical pattern to all the things that happen, from your toothache to your fights with your partner, to the days when you lose it with your children, to the days when you overeat, to the days when you're running late to drop the kids off at school. Yeah, there's a pattern. It's not random. So that's what menstrual cycle awareness eventually, over time, reveals to us.
Oh, what an invitation. Okay, you mentioned that there are these inner seasons, that once we understand kind of what those inner seasons are, and we start maybe journaling or writing down or tracking like where we are in our cycle and what things we're experiencing, that can be helpful for us. Can you give us a little bit of specifics around what those seasons are, so we can have sort of that framework to help us conceptualize and understand what those different, seasons might bring for us?
The 4 phases: menstruation, pre-ovulation, ovulation, and the premenstruum. And we equate menstruation with inner winter, because it has very similar qualities. I'll go into them in a moment. And pre-ovulation is the inner spring, and ovulation inner summer. And the premenstruum is our inner autumn, or inner fall, as you like to say in North America. And the reason we like to use the seasonal word is that there are echoes with the outer seasons. So when you're tracking cycle awareness and being really true to what your tendencies are, you will probably notice that at menstruation, your energies are at their lowest, and you have a feeling of just wanting to pull away from the world and to be private. And really, it would be nice if you didn't have to get up today and do anything at all and could stay in a nice little dream state. But there's at menstruation, our energies are all pulled deeply inwards. So we have a very strong, deep inner focus. It's like the spotlights have been turned inward on ourselves, and we're not, the outer world is in dark, a bit like I always think in wintertime, when it's dark and cold outside and the day, and the houses are all just lit up inside. Mm-hmm. There's that sort of soft light feeling within ourselves at that time. Now, I should probably emphasize that each of us will have our own very particular flavor of these inner seasons. So I'm sort of just really giving a little kind of snapshot of these sort of archetypal tendencies, and some will experience more than others, and so we'll have our own kind of relationship with them. But so from our inner winter of menstruation, we move out into our inner spring, and that first half of the cycle is a movement out of expansion and growth. And we have, in the Northern Hemisphere, we've just crossed the summer solstice, which is the sort of pinnacle moment of that growth, when everything stood still, the days have now reached their longest. This is such a poignant moment, actually. It's the beginning of the return of the dark, the second phase. Well, we have that pattern echoing in our menstrual cycle. So we've got this lovely expansion of energy. And so when we come into our sort of pre-ovulatory phase, there's qualities, those inner spring qualities of being kind of reborn, there's new life, there's a feeling of possibility again, and a kind of restoration of energy that happens at menstruation. So menstruation is meant to be really a time of rest. If we could follow our tendency to just be inner, we rest and do absolutely nothing, which is what we really, really need. And then out of that rest, excuse me, organically, new life comes. outer spring is a miracle to me every year when it comes out of the dark and, deadness of winter. And we have that within ourselves. There's a sense of freshness. We come, cynicism gets parked. And we go, oh, maybe things are okay. There's like an innocence and so on. And then comes the summer of our cycle, the inner summer ovulation, which is really where this is where we're seen as, this is kind of the acceptable face of woman, really, of us. The summer phase, the energies are all out there. So it's the complete opposite of menstruation. The inner lights at the summer of our cycle are sort of dim now, and we're just out in the world and, attending to others. So here our energy is on the outer world, what we're doing, and there's capacity in our system, and it's superwoman territory. And you can be superwoman for maybe 10 days max. And I see it every month with Sjanie, although I have to say it's not 10 days anymore now, Sjanie. It's a little shorter.
Well, it's getting longer. You mean I'm pure superwoman?
You're pure superwoman. And I mean, it's just so funny. It's so funny watching Sjanie going through the cycle every month. I mean, honestly, a few days ago, she was flying high and spinning, multiple plates. And I'm in awe. She's just pulling off all sorts of jobs, fortunately, that I hate doing. And she's just taken them all down because she can do it. I love that phase of yours, Sjanie. And then the cycle turns and you come off that pinnacle.
Yeah.
And it's so distinct, isn't it?
Yeah. Now I'm in the autumn of my cycle. I'm day 19, and it's a very different, much more conservative with what I do, much less generous about how much I give. It's a very different kind of orientation where I can't afford to do that much and be that generous anymore, because I will pay the price. And that's what the inner autumn comes along with, is just this gear shift to remind us to come back to ourselves. It's kind of like a reality check, has all the natural built-in sort of check-ins for sustainability, where we suddenly start to feel our own needs. And because our energy is waning, we start to feel our own limits and our own edges. And for many people, the inner autumn is quite a struggle, or they feel really out of control or hugely reactive, very strong emotions. And it in part has something to do with the fact that we're being called back to tending to ourselves and our own needs. And if we ignore that, well, all hell breaks loose. This tends to be what happens. So the inner autumn is this kind of gradual return to that inner winter that Alexandra so beautifully described. It's this gradual returning of our own inner life, our own inner lights, what we're needing. And it pulls us back into that place of rest, where, of course, then menstruation is there to catch us and to rejuvenate us and refuel us and give us the rest that we need, so that we can go out once again and do what we do in the world, and be all we are and give all the ways we tend to give. Yeah, so that's a little kind of snapshot of the seasons and the cycle.
Oh, thank you for walking us through that. I feel like even when I just learned those words, like language really does create reality. And so when you don't have language for it, it's really hard to acknowledge its existence and become aware of it and start noticing it. So I think even when I just got that language for it, that felt like a real opening for me to start embracing it and living in alignment with it. So I know one of the things that my audience, they're all families, right? Lots of menstruating caretakers listening. How can this menstrual cycle awareness, how can we really how can we integrate this into our mothering, into our parenting? And how can that be a value add in that context?
I notice I feel very emotional when you ask that question, because I recognize there is such a thirst for parents to feel resourced and held. Most of the parents I know, and certainly this has been true for me, feel under-resourced and unheld in their experience of parenting. And whilst it's true, we need community, we need all kinds of outer holding to do the work of parenting, which is an enormous practical task, but even more so, a massive emotional undertaking. And the combination of those two things, the practical work of parenting plus the emotional work, is demanding beyond anything. It's like, I mean, I don't need to tell anyone listening how demanding that is, right? We all know. But just how desperate we all are to feel resourced in that. And so there are so many things to say in answer to this question, Rachel. But the first thing that comes to me is just how when we have young children, we all inherently know the need for rhythm in our parenting, because babies who are so close to nature, they're so undisturbed by the sort of overculture which has separated us from our natural ways of being, which are cyclical. Babies are so cyclical, they have these innate rhythmic needs, which can start off a little chaotic. That's part of transitions, right? Newborn babies, they're a little kind of chaotic. But as they grow, the holding of rhythm really helps them to stabilize in their development and really helps them to kind of feel soothed and settled in their nervous system. I mean, I'm thinking particularly toddlers, how they love that clarity of rhythm and that clarity of holding. And we are no different in our need for rhythm. And I feel like family life overall is really longing for rhythm. And I feel those of us with the menstrual cycle, have this incredible anchor in our beings to create rhythm in family life through our menstrual cycle. Our menstrual cycle can set the whole tone and rhythm for family life, can become this underlying, sustainable holding right from the early years all the way through to our children's kind of graduation when they fly the nest. We can hold them in the kind of ebbs and flow of our cycle. And I can say more about that later if you're curious to know what that actually looks like in practice. But that's the one thing. And then the other thing is that there is such a difficult journey, again, I feel emotional saying this, for mothers in the process of learning to care for another, while at the same time learning to care for ourselves. It's one of the most difficult things I feel as a mother, is how to do that. And that's ongoing, that journey. It's like they change, their needs change, we need to change, our needs change, it's constantly shifting. And menstrual cycle awareness plugs us very deeply into what our own needs are on any given day. And that doesn't necessarily mean that we can tend to them, because there are certainly phases in parenting where the needs of our child must be prioritized. That's just how it is with parenting. And yet, knowing what we're needing, just feeling what we're needing creates a space for who we are in the moment. It creates a feeling, firstly, of connection to ourselves, but also a groundedness in ourselves, because we're now at home in ourselves, we're with ourselves, as opposed to just shutting down, disconnecting, overriding, and kind of in the doing and caretaking. Menstrual cycle awareness keeps you plugged in to yourself in a very real way. And that is life-saving, I will say. I mean, that's make or break some days, where things get really hard. And just if you can feel what you're needing, it carries you. And then it also happens, in my experience, that even though it seems impossible, like let's say you've got a young, sick child and they're just needing you 24/7, which happens at times, you realize you're exhausted, you feel your own need for being, you want to be held, you want to be looked after, whatever it is you're so longing for. It's amazing how acknowledging that sort of miraculously opens up the place for you to receive at least just a little bit of that. You find yourself just making different choices or asking for help in different ways, or doing a little something that goes a long way to meeting that, exhausted place in yourself. And again, that makes parenting sustainable. That gives us the kind of nourishment that we're needing to be able to do what we're doing for the long haul. It's a marathon, parenting. It's a marathon. So without cycle awareness, we would burn out, we would lose connection to ourselves. Our relationships with our children would be massively fraught because we would be even more stressed and out of sorts. And so on and so forth. There are many, many more things to say, but just to give you a couple of the things that were coming to me first. And I mean, I'm curious, Alexandra, maybe you have some thoughts to add.
Well, of course, I don't have children, I should say, so I've observed Sjanie. Actually, I just want to say how moving it is, the way you've expressed it, actually, Sjanie. I found it really profound. And I think the thing that I probably would want to emphasize, what you said at the end, that the act of acknowledging the needs in and of itself gives us something. And it then invites in a possibility of something else that might unfold from that, because we make different choices because we're connected to ourselves. And, when you're, for instance, aware that you're just coming into your bleed and actually all you want to do is keep away from everybody and you just want to be really quiet, if someone says, contacts you, says, can you do so-and-so, job, and knowing where you are in your cycle and what your needs are, you would say, no, I'm terribly sorry, I can't do that today. And so you've just eased the load with the parenting by saying no to that extra job. It just gives you more choice. And that it's empowering, that choice. They can seem like micro moves, but let me tell you, we love the power of the 1% change. It's very powerful. So that little micro move of 1% packs a punch.
Yeah, we talk a lot about how the work we do happens like one small step at a time. So I truly appreciate this like 1% approach. Can you explain how we can step into honoring our cyclical needs 1% at a time? I love that you brought that up, Alexandra.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, there's no other way to really do it, I would say, than 1%. Yeah.
I'm just thinking now of people listening who aren't familiar with this work yet and are already looking at their parenting load and everything they've got to do. And they go, what? I've now got to track my cycle? What? And the 1% is just so low key. It's not, it so mustn't be another job to do. This is not another job to do. It's as simple as everyone's got the calendar, the family calendar, whatever it is, or your personal diary. And you simply mark, I mean, ideally on the family calendar. I'm always thinking of an Italian friend of mine who used to have their family calendar on the fridge, for the month. And she would just simply mark in the days of her cycle, day 1, 2, 3. She'd write them all in. So every time she went to factor some, put some date in the diary for a dental appointment for a son or whatever, she'd go, day 28. Nope. No, we're not doing anything on that date. She always had that simple reminder. So it can literally start off as basic as that. But then, you might just have your own little private something somewhere where you're jotting down just knowing where you are. So you've got that on the family calendar, but just starting to map your pattern. It can be just a few words here and there that you start to just note down. And it can be just immensely low key. But the benefits you'll notice far outweigh any kind of feeling of, I've got another job to do, because it really isn't that, and you don't want to approach it like that, because it suddenly puts you into the driver's seat of yourself in the way you haven't been before. And actually, just one other quick thing I want to add about the calendar is that your partner will be looking at that and noting, yes, she's about to bleed. And of course, by this point, you've probably shared with your partner how when you want to menstruate, you just don't want to have to cook that night, or, you're doing the washing up, and, it gives them the heads up on things as well. They're a little bit in the know. Yeah.
Yeah, the more you get to know your needs in your cycle, the more you can share your needs with your family, and the more you can be supported and kind of respected in what you're needing. That's really significant. It's profound, the amount of stress we put ourselves under trying to be something other than what we are, how we go against our own shifting energies. And I'm imagining that as people do this, they'll just start to notice how much less stress they're experiencing and how much more harmonious their family systems start to feel, because they're in a harmony with themselves, and therefore everyone is coming into harmony. It does feel that way to me, certainly, as the more harmonious I am with my cycle, the more harmony there is in my relationships, really, honestly, with everyone, but particularly in my family. And just coming to your question again, Rachel, about this 1%. So Alexandra's pointed to some very simple ways that people can start including menstrual cycle awareness in their life and in their kind of family awareness. Another little thing people can play with this 1%, which is just finding something small, is each day, when you do this thing of noticing what you're needing, is you could ask yourself, what's one teeny tiny way I could meet that need today? And to find something that is so imminently doable, no matter how full on your schedule, your life, your parenting situation is, what is the small thing you can do that way? Because in a way, that really starts to activate the power of menstrual cycle awareness. Because menstrual cycle awareness is, number one, the noticing of how you're doing and what you're needing. But number two, the honoring of that, which comes through just these little, as you said, little, I don't think you used the word feeble. Alexandra and I keep talking about feeble steps and how powerful feeble steps are. But small steps, how these small steps of honoring actually just put us into this place of harmony with ourselves. So, I'm just thinking of when my girls were little and I was bleeding, and, care of them was pretty much constant. And I was just needing rest. And the kind of thing I would do was I hang out on the sofa a lot more. Like I would do a lot more of those sort of quieter activities. Like that would be my 1%. I would choose things that would meet my need for stillness and kind of rest and invite them into that. And that used to go a long way at times. So that's a hopefully a good example, but it'll look different at different points in the cycle.
Yes. Oh my gosh, so much wisdom. It's funny, normally in these podcast conversations, I do a lot of talking and I'm just soaking it all in, just soaking it all in. I cannot highlight enough the point that I keep hearing you guys come back to of really it's about connection with yourself. Like on this podcast, one of the central tenets is connection. So it's like connection with our children, like all of the practical caretaking things involved in family life. Those are really standing on top of this foundation of connection with this other human being. And can we really truly be in authentic connection with another human being if we are not truly in authentic connection with ourselves? And the answer is no, from my perspective. I can't show up with authenticity and true unconditional love for another person if I can't give that to myself, because that's a mask that's showing up with this other person. That's not the real me. And menstrual cycle awareness is part of knowing who I am in these different seasons and the evolving form that takes and the evolving needs that are involved in that. And I liked your practical examples too. I mean, there were seasons that I would be in with my youngest where I would put a pillow on the floor, turn on Sesame Street, and dump out a bin of toys and just lay on the floor while they crawled around with me and would put guys in my hand and I would, make them walk around. And that was perfect parenting, afternoon for us.
We've all played those games where we're half asleep and, just providing the empty hand for them to load up the things in. Yeah. Brilliant.
Absolutely. And I have 3 children and we homeschool and we gentle parent, which is in theory, it's a lot of high level need. But I actually find that it is so much easier than sort of the more mainstream approach that I see being taken, because I hold just as much space for my needs as I do with my children. So rather than the focus just being on them and, they're going to win the soccer tournament and they're going to get A's in their class and all that. No, it's not me first or them first. It's just me too. I get to hold space for my needs too. And I believe and I see how they benefit from me being allowed to be a fully human person who gets to take up space in all of these conversations. And menstrual cycle awareness for a menstruating bodied person is a hugely valuable part of that.
Huge. I just love the way you're articulating that. It's beautiful.
Yeah. It's very well said. And I particularly love the bit about connection because, I'm with you on that. I'm with you on connection being the substrate of parenting, and that rests on, my connection to myself. That when I have connection, the creative possibilities are endless, just as they are when I have connection with my children. We come out of a sort of stuck place or a habitual place, and the space between us opens up, and there is so much more room for everyone's experience in that connection, rather than trying to manage or control the situation, which will anyway never works, does it? Tempting as it is,
Like you said, we can't necessarily always meet the need, but just acknowledging it and giving space to it and giving language to it. If my child is sensing that I'm not, thrilled, in a joyful state to be while we're on this walk together, there's no one taking it personally if I'm saying like, oh, I'm bleeding right now, so I'm feeling such a tremendous need for rest, like, and I'm also happy to take this walk with you, but I'm going to be lower energy on this walk today because my body is doing so much work in this other way. And I'm thinking a lot of things in my mind instead of saying them out loud. So just to be able to like, it's not necessarily like you said that I can spend all day in bed. Though I'm trying to make those 1% shifts all the time, but it's more that I can like show up with authenticity when I can notice and acknowledge and even give voice, even with my children, to all of those needs that I'm having.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it, because it gives context, and sort of brings them into your experience. And yes, that's so beautiful. I have a question. Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
I'm genuinely curious. So you homeschool. So I'm kind of curious with how has menstrual cycle awareness sort of informed your whole homeschooling experience? Because I homeschooled my daughter for 3 years. And I'm curious to hear, because there's something magical about not having a kind of outer system that you have to kind of keep in step with and keep pace with and keep up with. Yeah. Homeschooling has a huge advantage of it being done in one's own time and one's own timing. So I'm sort of curious what you've discovered about that with cycle awareness or anything.
Yeah.
Any thoughts?
Yes, I think exactly like you described. So for example, like once a week, we would have some sort of like, I ran this hack school club. I called it like homeschool adventure club. So once a week, there would be a smaller thing, but then once a month, we would have a bigger sort of overnight adventure. And I could like tailor all of these things that I'm planning to where I am in my cycle. So, when I'm in the parts where I'm wanting to be like connecting socially on a bigger level or being more physically adventurous, like as I'm planning all of these in my calendar, so I would tend to plan them one season at a time. So I would sit down at the start of fall, for example, and plan all the adventures for fall. And I'm absolutely factoring in like, oh, this would be the best time for that trip. And, oh, I know this adventure there's going to be a big turnout. So I'm going to plan that one like at this point in my cycle. Yeah. And even with the kids, like when they want to like dive deep in an interest that requires a lot of support from me, I'll be like, awesome. Like I will work on gathering the materials and making the connections for that. And then 2 weeks from now, we'll start diving in. So Brilliant. we can do that. Like we can like really dive in and do a lot of cool things, when I have that energy and when I'm in that space. And then when I go a bit more dormant, like in my inner winter, like that's when we can do all those downtime things. Like, hey, I just ordered that new set that you'd been asking for. And this is the perfect week for you to explore that while I rest.
Yeah, I'm so glad I asked you, because that's such a beautiful example of how your children are being entrained in cyclical life, whether they're conscious of it or not. They're having these times of inwardness and more quieter activities and being more home, and they're having times of outward and more social connection and physical exertion. You're holding them in that rhythm, and that we know that cyclicity is medicine. We know that following natural cycles is the most profound form of creating health and nervous system regulation and so on. So you're doing that for your children, and you're also doing it for yourself. And the other thing I love about your example, Rachel, is I often think, how do people plan their lives if they're not tracking their cycle? Because you have got like a weather forecast, roughly in 2 weeks' time, you're going to be like more up for things, and things are not going to feel like such a big deal. You're going to be able to take on more. So you can like say yes to something that's more complicated, requires, packing all the camping stuff and managing multiple. You can do it. And that when you're bleeding, that would just overwhelm the daylights out of you. You just like wouldn't want to leave your house. Yes. So to have that weather forecast system means it's so easy to make decisions. And then you don't find yourself in situations go, oh my word, like what was I thinking? This is hell. Like, how could I have thought this was a good idea? And it probably is a good idea. It's just the wrong time in one cycle. So yeah, I love that. I'm so glad I asked you.
Yes. And before menstrual cycle awareness, it's like I was aware that there was this rhythm and there was this cyclical flow to things. And then it wasn't until like really I found your book where I was like, oh, now it makes sense. Like, why? Like, I just sensed like, oh, I'm not, around here. That's not going to be a go for me.
Yeah.
But now it's like, okay, like now I have that, like, it's like the foundation got all filled in and now it all makes sense. And the kids I get to see, like, they give themselves permission for that too. Like they like to have a big social, extroverted adventure and then a couple of home days, like they go outward and then they go inward.
Yeah.
And so like they get to apply that to their own lives too, which is beautiful.
Yeah. And I'm also hearing, Rachel, that there's no judgment in you around that. You're not judging yourself for kind of not being the same all the time and needing different things, because people who aren't practicing cycle awareness often feel like, what's wrong with me? Why don't I want to do this? I love my friends. I love going out. I love seeing people, but I really don't want to do this. And they give themselves a hard time, or they feel that somehow it's less than to say no or to rest, etc. But it just sounds like you feel such deep permission to be those different ways. And I'm imagining your children are just receiving that permission through your role modeling of it, which is also very beautiful.
Thank you. My heart aches for the shame that so many women feel in their perfectly logical, normal, natural inability to be all things to all people at all times. So if this conversation can give one thing to everyone listening, maybe it could be permission.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Okay, the show notes can be found at sagefamily.com/podcast86, where you can also subscribe and get future show notes sent right to your inbox. What are your favorite resources, Alexandra and Sjanie, for people to dive deeper into this topic?
We have a free course, which is a really good place for people to start, which is called Love Your Cycle. And we can share the link with you in the show notes for that, which is a really great, like simple introduction to menstrual cycle awareness, and we'll just get you in the groove of the inner seasons. And of course our book Wild Power, which gives you a lot more detail and nuance about the cycle and the practice of cycle awareness. There's a whole chapter about practicing menstrual cycle awareness. Alexandra, any other key resources you want to name?
Because there are many sort of older mums, in the sense that people are having children later, there are a lot of people going, well into their 40s or actually close to menopause with children that are going through adolescence. It's not a great combination, but it's happening. And so I would heartily recommend our book Wise Power to those that are really in their mid-40s onwards.
That's about menopause, that book.
That's about menopause, to set them up for menopause. It's not that they're in menopause yet, but it helps them to sort of put things in context and what they're having to kind of care for and prepare for. So I would recommend our recent book, Wise Power.
And one final thing to mention is our podcast, which is called the Menstruality Podcast, where we have a ton of really good episodes, both with Alexandra and myself, but also with a variety of other people, exploring all things cyclical and all things related to menstruality, including the initiation of motherhood, matrescence. We have Amy Taylor-Kabaz, who you may know, she's on that. And another one of our team at Red School is talking about how menstruality, menstrual cycle awareness prepares us for pregnancy and motherhood. So there are a couple of motherhood-focused episodes on there, which people might enjoy as well.
Yes, I'm definitely we're going to link to all of that. The Wild Power book, cannot recommend it enough. I love your Menstruality podcast. I follow you guys on Instagram. And Wise Power, the book on menopause, is actually on my bookshelf. It's one of my next reads. I'm 40 and my kids are 17, 14, and 11 right now. And my mother actually passed away a few years ago. So I feel completely blind about what the next, future seasons of life look like. So when I heard that you had written this book, I was so excited to be able to take this menstruality like piece that you've already given me and sort of extend it into the next chapter of my life. So thank you sincerely for all of the work that you guys have put out there already and all of the work that you continue to do.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah, thank you very, very much, Rachel. It's been a gorgeous conversation. Thank you.